This is the brand new 2024 Yamaha MT-09, and if you're even half thinking about buying one, you should probably go and do it. For this, my friends, is an excellent motorcycle, and so in this video, we'll go through my 10 favourite things about it. Look, before we get started, I just want to give a massive thanks to today's video sponsor, and that's Karoos. This is my favourite app for navigating on my motorcycle because they use their own dedicated algorithm to seek out the best twisty and windy roads so you never have to ride a boring road again. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, check out the code down in the description, which will get you a 30-day free trial. Or if you want to take out a premium membership, there's a 10% discount code down there as well. So once again, a huge thanks to Karoos for their support. Now, number one has to be this CP3 inline triple engine, which is one of the best engines on the entire motorcycle market. It's an absolute peach. So what makes it so good? Well, I think if you compare it to one of the key competitors for this bike, which has to be the Triumph Street Triple, you know, that bike uses an inline triple as well, and it's 765 cc's. That makes more power. I think it's 128 horsepower peak at 12,000 RPM in the RS spec, and it makes 80 Newton meters of peak torque at 9,500 RPM. But this one, you see, is 890, so quite a bit more displacement. And while it is down, like I say, on power, this makes 117 peak, everything's just shifted lower in the rev range and it makes more peak torque, so 93 Newton meters at 7,000 RPM. It's just got this massive mid-range, which makes this bike so addictive to ride under acceleration, and really, it's absolutely brilliant at road speeds. I mean, the Street Triple has those extra revs, which obviously you can use on the track, but for the majority of riding, I'd take this any day for all that torque and usability. Now, a big part of the entertainment is the soundtrack, and for me personally, I absolutely love a triple. And from the previous gen, you still get this sort of stereo exit end can, which admittedly isn't much of a looker, but it does give you this nice balanced audio on both sides. Thing is though, exhaust systems are becoming more and more restrictive owing to stricter emissions regulations, but Yamaha have decided to combat that with what they call acoustic amplifier grills. This is a feature that was first seen on the MT-10 when it was updated a couple of years back, and basically you've got these two grills in the top of the tank, and the idea is that they resonate and give you more induction sound right in the cockpit where you're going to hear it the most as the rider. Now look, out on the road, these aren't exactly blasting absolutely loads of noise into your face. It more so just gives you a bit more of a satisfying sound when you get on the gas. And personally, I just think it's a smart little feature. It gives you just a little bit more of that angry triple sound without having to fit a potentially quite expensive and loud exhaust system. Although, I'd say this bike could probably sound pretty fantastic if you did. So look, you've got that beefy mid-range from this sweet triple engine, and also you're getting the sound piped right into your face. So what could possibly make this bike better under acceleration? Well, I'd argue a quick shifter. And the good news for 2024 is that this bike actually gets one fitted as standard, which is pretty impressive considering quite an aggressive price point. Now, this is the third generation of this quick shifter, so it's gone through a few changes. There are two modes for it actually. So one only lets you do upshifts when you're accelerating and downshifts when you're decelerating. Mode 2 lets you go either way, no matter whether you're accelerating or decelerating. And also, it disables itself in, you know, undesirable scenarios for a quick shifter, e.g. super low revs or super high revs, or when you've got a neutral throttle. Now, it is really nice and slick and definitely adds to the riding experience for all the scenarios in which it works, and I think it's probably only a few edge cases where you'll find you'll get that little indicator on the dash that shows that it's not currently enabled. Maybe it feels a bit strange because most manufacturers are looking to make their quick shifters work even better no matter what the scenario, so it could feel like this is a little bit of a cop-out, but it is standard fit on a 10 grand bike, and so you can't really complain at that. Now I feel like this bike is actually looking quite beefy nowadays, but it remains pretty slim. It's 193 kilograms wet, which I think is really quite impressive, and it's something that Yamaha generally do quite well. Last year I remember riding all of the MTs back to back, the MT-07, the MT-09, the MT-10, and I actually preferred this bike to the bigger MT-10 just for that extra agility and nimbleness. So in my opinion, it was already a really nice handling bike, but for 2024 they've just made some little tweaks to make it that bit sharper. Things like there are new suspension settings, so although it's largely the same fork, there are firmer springs to give it a bit more support, and also the rake is steepened up a little bit, and again that's going to contribute to that feeling of quick turning. Now I wouldn't say out on the road it's super aggressive or twitchy. The nice thing about this bike is it's just a great all-rounder, and so it's light and quick and sporty, but it doesn't get wearying or too much, and for me, ideally, that's what a naked bike is, like a really good balance. Now the suspension is fully adjustable, so you can tweak it to your liking, but if you do want a little more, just in terms of quality and also in terms of support, then you can pay 1,700 quid more for the SP version of this bike, which gets a diamond-like coating on the fork. It gets the Olin shock with a firmer spring again, along with a few other nice upgrades like keyless ignition and Brembo Stylema brake calipers. Honestly, the brakes are already pretty decent though on this standard bike. You've got the 4-piston radially mounted Advix calipers. They're not quite as bling as the Brembos, but there's more than enough power and they certainly do the job. Plus, as a neat little upgrade on this 2024 bike, you now get this Brembo radial master cylinder. The idea with the radial master cylinder is that it gives you a little more crispness and feel at the lever, and I think the braking is easily up to spec for the majority of riders on this bike. Like I say, plenty powerful. This is a nice little upgrade. It gives you that extra feel of quality, and it's really only those people who are extremely dialed into the braking, or perhaps someone who's really taking their potentially track days seriously, that I think is really going to find it necessary to upgrade to the SP purely for the braking. Now I really did like the previous gen of this bike already. If you watch the review I made of it, you'll know that straight away, but the one thing that would have potentially stopped me from immediately hard recommending it to somebody is the riding position. The bars sit really quite tall on these quite long risers, and while it does give you this sort of practicality and versatility of a very upright riding position, it just didn't feel that sporty, which didn't necessarily suit the rest of the bike with all that capability and performance. So for me, it's great news that they've addressed that with this particular update. The bars are 34.4mm lower and 1.5mm back, and the foot pegs are 30.6 millimeters further up and 9.5 millimeters back. So with the same seat height, I think it's 825mm, effectively, the rider is just pivoted on this point, slightly forward, and to me it feels much more engaging when you're riding it quicker. It's really quite neutral now, it's more typical of other naked bikes, and I think that's the right thing, it's got to be that nice balance. It's not so sat up that you can't get stuck into it when you're riding through corners and stuff, but also it's not so low and far forward that it's going to feel uncomfortable after, a few hours in the saddle. Now, from a technology perspective, of course it's got all the bells and whistles. It's got an inertial measurement unit to give you lean sensitive rider aids. It's got a whole bunch of rider modes. It's got wheelie control and MSR and things like that. But the thing is with press bikes, more often than not, I find a combination that I like, that feels natural to me out on the road, and then I don't really change it that much. What's great about this bike for 2024 though is it feels like they've made some little techie tweaks with features and gadgets that I think you're going to use on a more frequent basis. We've already talked about the quick shifter. There's self-cancelling indicators as well now, which I think are a really, important safety feature. I'm surprised you don't get them on that many more bikes because it's not a particularly complex feature, but if you're riding in busy urban traffic and you leave an indicator on, it does leave you open to potentially a bit of a misunderstanding and potentially an off. There's cruise control as well. Again, I'd like to see it on more bikes as standard, so it's brilliant to see it here, and they've really done a neat job of redesigning the switch gear so it's nice and easy to use. You can nudge it up and down by a mile per hour at a time, so it's a really good system. And also you've got a USB-C port located under the saddle, so you can either charge stuff by running the cable under there up to your bag, or maybe stashing your phone under there, or you could run a longer cable up to the bar to power accessories or things like the quad lock wireless charging head. These are the features that I think you'll get even more use out of and make this bike more enjoyable day in, day out. Now, as you can imagine, most of this stuff is managed through the TFT display, and this is another big improvement versus the previous generation. That bike had a 3.5-inch TFT display, which was a little bit on the small side, and it also had quite an unusual appearance with the lights down either side. And yeah, it just felt a bit quirky and maybe ungenerous in terms of the size of it. This one, the new one, is 5 inches and also a bit more typical of other TFT displays with just a flat slab. And I think it's much easier to read at a glance, and I think it just generally looks better too. It also has some connectivity features, so you can get your phone hooked up to it, your headset, and that'll give you nav and media and calls and stuff like that. And yeah, I think they've made a great job of it. Yamaha do tend to go a little bit quirky on their dashes sometimes. I'm thinking of stuff like the Tracer 9, for example, but this, they've done a cracking job, and it's quite normal in a good way. I've even got to say, I think I quite like the looks now. The previous generation was certainly divisive. They removed a lot of the bodywork and called it coverless. It was meant to be this sort of minimalist and very utilitarian design. And also they gave it this very distinctive headlight, which I think turned off a lot of people as well. And look, it is somewhat the same. You know, it's not going to be something that's going to suit people who like a really classic aesthetic, but I think they've just pared it back a little bit in terms of palatability. They've put a bit of bodywork back on the tail section. The new headlight is still, from the comments of the photos I put of this bike on YouTube the other day, again quite divisive, but I've seen more comments of people who like it than the previous one, I think. And so yeah, I think it's just a general package that's easier to get on with. I don't know if my tastes are changing a bit as well, but certainly with these pop-in cyan wheels and this grey paint job and a little bit of black here and there, personally I actually quite like it. If it's absolutely not your cup of tea, the good thing about the Yamaha lineup is you've always got the XSR 900, which is, you know, has a lot of the same stuff. It's not quite as up to date as this. I think it still gets the previous gen dash for the standard XSR 900. But yeah, it's definitely one to look at if this is just all a bit too modern and angular for your particular taste. Now, price-wise, it has gone up by a couple of £100 versus the previous generation. So it's now just over £10,100. A bit of a shame because we made a best bikes under 10 grand video the other day and I couldn't put it in, despite, you know, it being previously my default recommendation. But I think when you compare it to the competition, if you look at something like the Street Triple RS, the KTM 990 Duke, maybe the Ducati Monster, you know, this looks like really good value for money. You could argue maybe it's more comparable with the Street Triple R, which does come in just under 10 grand, but I think this bike has a few more features and capabilities, and that bike feels a bit more pared back in terms of spec. Honestly, I can't think of many better ways to spend £10,100. Overall, you know, like I say, the MT-09 was already one of my favorite naked bikes, but all the little tweaks and changes they've made for 2024 just cement its place as one of my main recommendations for a good value naked bike that has loads of performance and loads of fun. It is fundamentally the same formula. It's just all these little extra bits add up, I think, to make an even better bike, certainly for the road anyway. As always though, I'd love to know what you think of it, so do let me know down in the comments below. And also, if the XSR 900 slightly retro styling sounds like more your thing, then we made a full video walk around of it at EICMA last year in November, so I'll put it on the screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch in case you haven't already. Do hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle reviews like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.